Good evening, everyone. The time is 5:34. I'd like to call the Business Operations and Finance Committee meeting to order. May we have a roll call, please?
Yes. Brian Anderson,
Here.
Spencer Anderson,
Here.
Joanne Winfield.
Present.
All members are present in the boardroom.
All right, thank you very much. Next item is approval of the agenda. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Do you have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And the agenda is approved. Next item is approval of the minutes. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes for October 4th, 2022?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And the motion carries. All right, we're up to item 2A, which is our financial reports for September of 2022.
I'm sharing. Isn't that going on? An error occurred on screen sharing. 1 second, user error. I'll try it one more time. Tab, combined, share.
Okay, perfect. All right, so the overview for September of 2022. On the revenue side, you can see that we received our first equalization aid payment in September, and the next one that we typically receive is in early December. On the expense side, our payroll started for the new school year for our instructional staff, and also this included the annual health savings account payment to employees. Also, in September, there was a debt payment made. If you remember, we make debt payments 2 times a year, once in March and once in September. So there were a couple payments made there. Okay. Looking at our revenues without grants, our state sources included, of course, that equalization aid payment, and that increased over last year's payment in September. And our federal sources included that one-time governor's back-to-school aid. That was almost $600,000. So that was one of those one-time revenues that we talked about in the budget presentation. Okay. Then looking at our expenses without grants, you can see there's an increase in salary and fringe, and that's typical every year. And this in particular was due to the annual increases that employees received, our new comp plan, and the increased health insurance cost. Some of these expenses will start moving to ESSER, as we talked about using ESSER funds to help with our budget this year. Some good news is that so far this year, our health insurance claims have been lower than they were last year. As I said before, our health insurance claims last year were exceptionally high, but so far so good this year. So if that trend continues, that will help us with our bottom line at the end of the year. Looking at our grant revenues, initial grant claims, I keep saying, are made after September 30th, typically, but there was a grant claim made for high-quality instruction. That was that project that they were talking about in the Teaching, Learning, and Equity Committee back in September. And then finally, expenses in grants. We're going to continue to see an increase in the use of ESSER funds as we use these dollars again to reduce the use of our fund balance this year, particularly in salaries and fringe. So you'll see that trend throughout the year. And then purchase services, the increase there includes, I talked about it before, the restorative justice and also math curriculum licenses that were purchased this year. Any questions?
Do any of the committee members have questions? All right. So there's a recommended action to move to recommend approval of the September 2022 financial reports to the full Board of Education. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Do you have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Now we're up to item 3A. This is information and discussion items. Our discussion item for tonight is 2023-2024 budget discussion and information.
Well, since this is one of my favorite topics, I'll start and then we can take it from there. I do want you to know that since Dr. Garrison has been hired, Dr. Garrison and I have been having multiple conversations, on many things, but one of the main things has been the budget. I have created for Dr. Garrison what I call a process sheet. Basically, it goes, if I was to continue in that seat, here's the first thing I would do, here's the second thing, here's the third thing, to give him at least some benefits of, my budgetary experience to say, here are things that you could be looking at, each week, each month as you're going forward. Some of the basics for that are, right now, since you've approved the last budget, you can start working on the new budget. And I think the first thing that is typically done is a review of your projected revenues and expenditures. Now, I would suggest waiting to do this until after next Tuesday, because I do think that the results of the elections, especially the state elections, will have an impact on school funding. It is my belief and assumption that if Tony Evers continues to be the governor and the Republicans stay in power in the legislature, there may be some negotiations on some type of school aid because of the surplus that is currently exists in the state budget. So I think that, how much, I wouldn't even want to hazard a guess, but I would at least think that there'd be a good potential for some increase. It is also my assumption that if Tim Michaels were to win the governor's race and the Republicans stay in control of the legislature, that the chance of public education getting more funding putting in to the system would be less likely than if Governor Evers. So I think if you wait, you can take a better estimate. And there are the forms to fill out. So in the finance department would be able to say, based on what we anticipate will be our student count for next year, they can run different scenarios to say, under these different assumptions, here's what we would assume our revenue to be. And then you can take even your expenditures from this year and determine, what similarity you think would exist. And then you can balance take your projected revenues, your projected expenditures, and see if there's a gap. And if there is, then at least you have a number to start saying, okay, if this is a gap, now what do we need to do to fill that gap? So that's the first stage that you do. And like I said, the finance department will be able to do that with various assumptions. So my guess is after next Tuesday's election that the board could have, some projected revenue assumptions given to you by the end of the month. So you'd at least be able to see, here are some under these assumptions, here's the revenue you might have to work with. And if we looked at the expenditures for this year, if they were similar, here would be the gap you'd have to work out. So that's the first part. My assumption is you're going to have some type of a gap. So then what you want to take a look at is how could you fill that gap? And one of the things that we talked about, and it's on the agenda for later on, in fact, on our full board meeting, is what I call it stop the bleeding. In other words, if you continue to lose students, you're going to get less and less revenue. If you roughly want to figure, you can say that for every student that leaves the district, you lose $10,000. So like last year, we lost about 250 students. We lost about $2.5 million. So the best way to help your revenue is to basically keep the numbers that you have and if possible even grow those numbers. So one of the things you're also going to be talking about tonight is the intermediate concept to determine, if you took a look at that concept, is there some options in which students that currently leave because of that option might want to stay, and people that had left because of that option might want to come back. So, and that you're having later on today. The next thing, and I am working on a chart for Dr. Garrison, is what I call student and teacher ratio. What I've asked each of the principals to do is to send me a list of their general ed classrooms and basically say, you know, if everybody was in school, so you had perfect attendance, how many students would be in each of your classrooms and how many adults are in that classroom? So we can then take a look at, you know, what is your true average of classroom teachers to students, you know, from the elementary levels up through the intermediate. It gets a little more challenging in high school, so what Ms. Pels is running for me is section size of all her classes. But then you can start taking a look. Right now, you already have board recommendations on class size. So you can see, you know, are you operating classes that are lower than that, than your recommended sizes? And if so, what modifications could you do to potentially, you know, compress classes and save staff? So we're compiling the information. We're actually using 2 different sources so we can, you know, check and double check each of those. So, and these aren't things that you do in a day or two, but it's the process that you start talking through, because obviously, like this past year, if you have a multi-million-dollar deficit, you're probably going to have to look at staffing. What I've always said is take a look first at your staffing that is already vacant positions, and then take a look at positions you might have by attrition. I always have told people I have a great loyalty to people. I don't have loyalty to positions. So you can start taking a look at where could we make modifications or changes so that we may be able to cut costs and yet still preserve jobs. One of the next things I think you should take a look at is what other funds do you have available, or will you have available, that could help lessen deficit? In other words, I think currently you still have ESSER funds available. So if you use some of your ESSER funds to balance your budget, you only, I think, have them for 1 more year, but that might be, you know, dollars that can be put towards balancing your budget for at least the first year to give you a little more time in the long run. I don't know how many funds you have left. I wanted to venture a guess that I thought you still had about $3 million in ESSER funds, but Wendy will, 5, all right? So Wendy gave us a better number, $5 million in ESSER funds that may still be available for you to balance the budget. So that's another thing to take a look at, is what funds you might have available. I've already mentioned after that, and the executive committee is already doing this. We talked about it today with Dr. Garrison, and there is an evaluation. So when we have vacant positions, of going through a review of, do we need to fill that position? If it does need to be filled, is there someone that currently is on staff that could fill that position, which would leave an open position in which we could cancel? But again, taking a look at each and every one of those, and then start taking a look at your programs, doing a program review to determine, you know, are we spending the money? Are we getting the bang for a buck in our various programs? If not, are there some programs that we could cancel or let go or put on pause that might save us dollars for, you know, a particular budget year? And then, of course, another option you have that we're going to also talk about in the full board meeting are referendums. I sent you today a draft question. Now, I want to be clear. I didn't say that this question, I didn't send this out saying this is a question you should have. What I wanted to show you is what the essence of a question needs to have. You need to basically have the amount of money you're asking for and the purpose you're using it for. You know, the numbers that I used, Luke had got some of those. They would have to be polished, but if you were to do some type of facilities, that's the type of information that you need to draft your question. And then, of course, I think the thing that takes the longer amount of time and the more work is explaining in detail to people, you know, what you need and why you need it. Now, remember, your question has to be finalized 90 days before the election. So we just happen to determine, okay, what would be the exact drop dead date for a referendum question. And actually, it's earlier than I thought because the spring election is earlier. January 3rd is your drop dead date. That's when you have to have the question in its final form approved by the board and be able to send to the clerk to be put on the ballot, which means you have to back it up for when you would want to have a draft question that you could discuss and that you could, approve at an earlier board meeting to send to, we've used Quarles and Brady, they're a legal firm, but to send to a legal firm to make sure that all the verbiage is in the legal format it needs to be. So you just need to back that up for things that would have to happen in the next couple months. That's a rough summary of what we're talking about. I sent you a sheet on building closures. You're not going to save a lot of money by closing a building. Now, the costs that I sent you, they don't include the custodial costs that we would save by closing a building because we contract that out and we'd have to renegotiate the contract with our custodial services. It doesn't show the food service costs that we would save because, again, that's a contracted service we'd have to negotiate. So my guess is for some of your buildings, you'd save about $150,000 if you were to close it down. Though that's not insignificant, I think, maybe there's different purposes our buildings can be used for that, can save the district money. So they're all things to take a look at. The more options that you have and the discussions that you have, I think provide more opportunities for the board to decide, here's how we would like to go about balancing the budget. And I guess I'll take questions.
All right, do any of the committee members have questions so far?
I just want to point out something I've pointed out, many times in the past, is that your budget problem is a fixable problem. Though you are in dire straits, the issues you have are fixable. So it's not like, the panic mode of saying there's nothing we can do, because that's not true. As you go about the next one, there are solutions. It's just that the earlier you engage in solutions, the more time you give yourself to look at different options. But it is a fixable problem.
It seems like there's no questions as of right now, but you did share a lot of really good things for us to take in and kind of process and think about. And it does. I know people have been talking a lot recently about maybe they're closing schools. Well, you brought up a good point. It might not be even beneficial for us, really, to look at that. Look at alternative means of how we're using space, because. Looking at that one form, it looked like, without taking into account the cleaning services and the food services, the highest one was 115?
Yeah, it's not, they're not large amounts of money. So like I said, I think you'd look at about 150,000. But I think that, one of the things, again, is as you're discussing it, they provide different options for you. One of the things that would be beneficial to the board, like I said, I did give a process sheet to Dr. Garrison to use. If the board would like it, to be happy to send a copy to you, as long as you realize that in the format I wrote it for him, but I could rewrite so the information I provided him for the various steps to follow, you could have the same thing. So I'd have no problem doing that.
Me personally, I could say that I would probably like it just as I like having kind of a checklist of items, kind of just broad going to narrow, so that I have a nice process to follow. So, because I'm not scared to say that I don't have as much experience in financial stuff that you do. So I will take whatever you can give us to learn, or at least me to learn.
All right, I'll play with it a little bit so it reads more for you as board members, and then I'll send that out.
All right. Well, thank you. All right. Well, go ahead.
Just make sure we're in the right place. Is this the, are we on 3A? Is that
Yes.
where we're at? Just kind of explain, look at that BMHS HVAC process. Is that well, I think this project has moved around a little bit. Is this work being done, or it was set to be done, or what has happened with this work?
When I talked to Luke, and he said, like he said, these numbers would have to be massaged, but you have some ESSER funds dedicated to do some work. These projects are actually above and beyond what you'd already scoped for from the ESSER funds, so this would be additional work that could be done on a referendum. But like Luke, emphasized to me, the Director of Building Grounds, is that, these are some rough numbers, and I just wanted to share it as a rough example of what you could do.
Gotcha. So, because I was saying, like, this is not the current HVAC work that was being done at the high school, because there is another project.
Right, there's another project being done. This is separate from the work that's already being done with ESSER funds.
Okay. And then just looking at the projections, kind of explain, like, what the projections are, kind of how to read the chart.
Okay, if you take a look at the chart, and like I said, we're also creating another chart. This we keep on a regular basis as things, fluctuate. We're also creating one that basically, as of right now, how many imperfect tens or seats. But the way you read this, if you take a look at, the school is in purple in the top, and then it lists for the grade level the capacity. Now, the capacity is the number of students that your current policy says that you could have in that grade level, in that building, with that amount of teachers. So the first line is your capacity. The second is, as of the last time this report was run on 10/27, this is how many students you had in those classes with the number of teachers. So you can see in the first one, if you looked, is that, you could add 10 more students to those sections before they'd be full. And it goes across for each of the grade levels. So it's just a way of determining with what you already have set for what you have the recommended numbers for the number of teachers that we have for a particular grade level in that building and the number of students that we have in that grade level recorded at this time. Here's what we believe your capacity would be for the number of additional students you'd be able to add. But we are, as I said, we are creating another form to double check, to make sure that, when we get to this part of the discussion, we've had several methods of, double checking to make sure all our information is as accurate as possible.
Yeah, that's it.
All right. Is there any more questions? All right. Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much for actually presenting this to us, and I look forward to seeing what other stuff will come up in our process.
And like I said, Dr. Garrison's in the audience at this time. We've been having multiple discussions and taking a look. So, we'll be moving forward, to make sure that the board has different options to take a look at as it goes through this process. And I've, informed Dr. Garrison that I'm only a phone call away. You can always bounce something off me.
Appreciate it. All right. So our next item is item 4A. These are our action items for the night. Our first one is 2022-2023 Fund 60 Student Activity Group approval.
Yeah, so this is our second time looking at these, and just to recap, per board policy, the board approves all Fund 60 activities annually. Our only new one this year is the freshman class of 2026. And as you will notice, most of these are for the high school, and we do have 3 for McNeil. And just a reminder that the accounting regulations changed a couple of years ago and specified that anything that is in our Fund 60 activity accounts must be student-led. So we have been working towards moving anything off of Fund 60 that is not specifically student-led. They're not making the decisions, and they go into our Fund 21. So those activities may still exist. They're just in Fund 21. So it's been a process. We still have 3 accounts, like I said, in McNeil that are student-led, but for consistency, we are going to work towards moving those to Fund 21. Do you have any questions?
Are there any questions? All right, there's no questions. So the recommended action for this is to move to recommend approval of the 2022-2023 Fund 60 student activity groups to the full Board of Education. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Do you have a second?
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. All right, motion carries. The next item, item 4A, is a resolution authorizing a taxable tax and revenue, promissory note for cash flow purposes in the amount not to exceed $7 million.
Yeah, that one's a mouthful. So we are requesting permission to enter into a short-term borrowing agreement for our cash flow needs. Districts often experience gaps in cash flow, particularly in November, in between those September and December equalization aid payments and before we start receiving our tax levy revenues in January. So this line of credit would help us to cover that gap to ensure that we are still able to meet our payroll if we need it. My hope is to not to have to dip into the line of credit, but if it is necessary to do so, repayment would be made as soon as we start to receive those revenues. So it's typically within a few days or a week or so. Are there any questions on the line of credit?
Are there any questions?
Yeah, just one question. Is there, I think, when I've been involved with these in the past, even for the school district of Beloit, aren't these typically qualified funds so that it'd be non-taxable?
With the line of credit, I believe it's not. But when you get the trans, the tax and revenue anticipation notes, you can get either.
So this is not a revenue anticipation note?
Well, no, it's a line of credit as opposed to so it's only if we need it. Whereas the revenue and tax anticipation note is you borrow it, you receive it for the year and pay it back at the end. This is just if we dip into it.
Okay.
Are there any other questions? I do have a question about this. So if we do pursue this, I'm assuming it has some kind of effect on our bond rating, correct? Or no?
No, this is just a cash flow. This is really just for the shortfall. So typically districts have a cash flow ebb in November and sometimes later in the year in February and or May. So it's not, it's just really to cover those gaps. It's
Yeah, one of the major reasons is that if the state were to give us our aid payments on a regular basis,
Right.
there would be no need to short-term borrow. But they don't. They give it to us basically at times that benefit the state. So we know we have the revenue coming in from the state. However, we're not going to receive it in time to meet every payroll. So sometimes if if your checking account gets low enough, you have to borrow a little money until your next paycheck comes in. That's a little bit like this. In other words, we know the revenue is coming in from the state. It just isn't coming in at
When
the
we need it.
appropriate time, so we have to dip in to meet, in this case, payroll. And then, of course, once we get the state aid, then we can repay that and, go back to even. And then we pay a certain percent on the amount of money we borrowed for the length of days we borrowed it.
And also because we have dipped into fund balance in the previous year, I just really want to have this as a safety net. Like I said, we may not have to dip into it, but there's just so many variables, and every year that changes. So if you have a lot of construction projects in the summer when your schools are closed and you end up making a lot of those payments in the fall, you can find yourself with a cash shortfall. With our health insurance claims, if a lot of people get sick next week and suddenly we're doling out a lot more cash than we typically would, then we might have a cash shortfall. So it's really, it's not a judgment of how well the district is doing. It's just a matter of timing on the revenues you do receive and just making sure that you have that money there in case you need it. Does that help?
Yeah, I just want to make sure that that was clear because,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yep.
All right. Does anyone else have any questions? All right. So there is a recommended action for this. It is moved to recommend approval of the resolution authorizing a taxable tax and revenue anticipation promissory note for cash flow purposes in the amount not to exceed $7 million to the full Board of Education. Do we have a motion?
I'd rather be safe than sorry. Aye. Oh, motion.
I'll second that.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Wait, point of order. Well, we should do a roll call
Okay.
because it's a resolution.
Okay. Well, thank you. That was the first for me. All right. May we have a roll call vote?
Yes. Brian Anderson,
Aye.
Joanne Winfield,
Aye.
Spencer Anderson.
Aye.
Motion carried.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. Now we are down to meeting closing. So our next meeting date will be Tuesday, December 6th, 2022 at 5:30 p.m. And we are to adjournment. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. Motion carries. Have a good night.
Okay, I'm going to call to order the Human Resource Committee meeting at 6:31 PM. Mrs. Shope, could we have a roll call, please?
Yes. Spencer Anderson,
Present.
Brian Anderson,
Here.
Amy Levy. Here. Sean Levy,
Present.
Joanne Winfield,
Present.
Megan Miller. Present. And Greg Schneider is not able to be with us tonight.
Okay. Is
So all
there,
members except Greg are present.
all right, is there a motion for the approval of the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved by Board Member A. Levy and seconded by Board Member S. Anderson. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. The motion passes unanimously. Is there a motion for the approval of the special meeting minutes for October 11th?
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved by Board Member M. Miller and Board Member B. Anderson. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. Motion passes unanimously. Is there a motion for the approval of the minutes for October 18?
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved by Board Member A. Levy and Board Member S. Anderson. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. Motion passes unanimously. 2A. A motion may be made to convene the Human Resource Committee into closed session pursuant to Section 19.85, parentheses 1, parentheses C, of the Wisconsin State Statutes relative to considering employment, promotion, compensation, or performance evaluation data of any public employee over which the governmental body has jurisdiction or exercises a responsibility. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Board Member A. Levy and seconded by Board Member S. Anderson. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, Mrs. Shope, could we have a roll call vote, please?
Yes. Megan Miller,
Aye.
Amy Levy. Aye. Brian Anderson,
Aye.
Spencer Anderson,
Aye.
Joanne Winfield,
Aye.
Sean Levy.
Aye.
Motion carried.
All right. We'll go into closed. All right. The Human Resource Committee is reconvening in public in order to take action. Is there a motion or discussion or items or questions for public?
I just have one comment of appreciation for Exhibit B. It was laid out beautifully, it was easy to follow, and everything was accurate. So thank you so much to the team.
I just have a question. I know, so it's okay. So like the matrix is attached, and so I don't, so it's posted, but it's not posted as a topic of discussion. But I just wanted to ask if there was a timeline for, or if a timeline exists for reconsidering the theater and drama pay.
Yes.
So,
So that's going to be our next board meeting.
oh,
Met with them, yeah.
okay. So I'll just repeat because it was another thing. So it's going to be at the next, which board meeting? Yeah, sorry. I was trying to be nice, not make you get up, but I forgot. You have to be at the mic for the internet to hear you.
Yeah, so that one is in the works. So it's going to be in an upcoming board meeting that will include that.
Beautiful. Thank you. Really appreciate it. That's all I had.
All right, is there a motion for items?
Yes, I would like to move approval of exhibits A, B, and C.
Second.
Moved by Board Member Megan Miller and seconded by Board Member Spencer Anderson. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Motion passes unanimously. Facility Services Department restructure, is there a motion?
I'd like to move approval, let me make sure I got the right language here. I'd like to move approval of the Facility Services Department restructure as identified in the attached memo.
Is there a second?
Second.
Moved by Board Member Megan Miller and seconded by Board Member Amy Levy. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Motion passes unanimously. And we're on to our next meeting date. Our next meeting date is Tuesday, November 15th, 2022 at 6:30 PM. Is there a motion for adjournment?
So moved.
Second? Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved by Board Member Amy Levy, seconded by Board Member Megan Miller. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 All right, it's 7. Motion passed unanimously. We are adjourned. And we'll start the next meeting at 7:25, 7:19 now. Need a couple minutes.
Sean, do you know where the public comment language is?
I don't know. Board Member Levy, you Get ready, everybody. We're going to get started. All right, calling to order the November 1st, 2022 regular board meeting at 7:25 PM. Mrs. Shope, could we have a roll call, please?
Yes. Brian Anderson,
Here?
Spencer Anderson,
Here.
Amy Levy,
Here.
Sean Levy,
Present.
Megan Miller,
Present?
Juwan Winfield,
Present.
and Greg Schneider is not here tonight, so everybody is here except Greg.
Is there a motion for the approval of the agenda?
So moved?
Second?
It's been moved by Board Member Megan Miller and seconded by Board Member Brian Anderson. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. The motion passes unanimously. We're now on to Pledge of Allegiance. Board Member Miller, will you lead us in our pledge?
My pleasure. I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Mrs. Shope, do we have public comment?
I do not have any public comments or emails to read.
Okay. We're on to 3A Superintendent Board Report.
Well, the first thing I'd like to report is that the transition with Dr. Garrison and myself is going very smoothly. We are communicating on a regular basis, and the last 2 days, we have went into every one of the buildings, had tours of the building, were able to talk with staff and building administration, and continuing to hold. So I think the transition is going extremely well at this point, and he was going to be more than ready to take over in a short period of time, which is my second comment, and that's to say thank you to the board and to the staff for the time I've been able to be here. This is my last board meeting, so I just want to thank everybody for the opportunity and wish you all the best of luck in the future.
Thank you, Dr. Anderson. Committee reports, committee and other board reports, business operations and finance.
So tonight, in business operations and finance, we covered the financial reports for September 2022. And we also had a kind of like a pre-discussion on the budget decisions and information to come for the coming year of 2023 and 2024. And also we covered a resolution to authorize a taxable tax of revenue anticipation promissory note for cash flow purposes. And that's just to cover that gap in between just in case. We're not saying we're going to use it, but it's there as if we need it. I'm sure Dr. Anderson could probably explain a little bit better than I can, but.
Yeah, what it is that we get our aid payments from the state not on a regular basis. So sometimes when we need to dip into, like for payroll, we may be going to receive some of our state aid, but it won't come in time. So what we do is we have to short-term borrow, which means we have to borrow a certain sum of money for a certain period of days until our state aid comes in which we pay that loan back. If the state were to pay us on 12 equal payments, we'd never have to short-term borrow.
Thank you very much. And that is it for the Business Operations and Finance Committee.
Teaching, learning, equity, and pupil services.
Our committee met on October 18th. We got sort of a showcase of several amazing and innovative grants that were very, well written, and we're getting to do wonderful programs now, ranging from mental health to AODA to students transitioning out of homelessness. Just really exceptional work that we're doing for our kids and our communities. So I was very thankful to the People Services Department and everyone who worked on that. So I wanted to bring that up again. We also, to build on the great work that I think our People Services and Teaching Learning staff is working on, is the Loads to Success is coming back and is, expanding out even further than it was before. So if you missed that presentation, definitely tune into YouTube and watch it. It was spectacular. And the last really cool thing that we talked about at our last committee meeting was we got, we were, I can't think of what words are right now. Sorry, we were privileged to have somebody come from scouting and talk about the benefits of scouting in our district and sort of the inclusion and long-term benefits of that programming for our youth in our community. So all very exciting stuff focusing on our kids. So that is what we heard at that meeting.
All right, and the Governance Committee met on October 25th at 6 p.m. One of the ways that we use the Governance Committee is to discuss upcoming items or to kind of reset and refocus the board. After having hired our superintendent, a number of things we needed to put on the agenda. They covered referenda planning, budget development, Evergreen Solution staffing recommendations, intermediate school model, Board of Education annual self-evaluation, diversity, equity, and inclusion, CISA 6 DAPES evaluation model, board development, and school safety overview. Some of those items are action items, discussion items for us tonight. And others are things that the board will be completing over the next 2 months. Next committee.
So policy will meet tomorrow, November 2nd, right here at COLAC in the boardroom at 5:30. We'll be covering again policy 377 and policy 377 rules 1 through 3.
And now to our consent agenda. Is there a motion, or would anyone like anything separated out of the consent agenda?
I'd like to pull item A, please.
Okay. Anything else for the consent agenda? Okay, is there, you want to discuss A first, or are we voting on the other one first? All right. Is there a motion for items B, C, D, E, and E?
I move approval of the consent agenda, including items B, C, D, E, and F.
All right.
Second.
Moved by Board Member Megan Miller, seconded by Board Member Spencer Anderson. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. Motion passed unanimously. A. Board Member Levy.
Yeah, just one question. According to policy 662.1, management of student funds, all student activity funds shall be under the financial control of the Board of Education. So keeping that in mind, I'm wondering why there are activities that fundraise that are not included on the list for approval this evening.
So we actually have 2 funds where activities can be housed. They can be housed in Fund 60 and in Fund 21. Typically in Fund 60, those are student-led. The decisions are being made by students as to the fundraising and the spending. Either one fund, those activities can fundraise in either fund. So if you don't see it in Fund 60, it's most likely in Fund 21.
So will we be approving activities that are funded or those funds are held in Fund 21 at a later date?
No, we typically do not approve the items that are in Fund 21.
So why do we need to approve 60 if we're not approving 21, if both of them are related to fundraising? And again, according to policy 662.1, if it's under the jurisdiction of the board, I would take that to mean that we need to approve that.
I don't have the wording in front of me, but it was my understanding that it was the Fund 60 activities only that were coming to the board.
If you could follow up and get clarity on that, that would be great. And so just for my clarification with Fund 60, so just from a parent perspective, for example, National Junior Honor Society at Fruzen, they just had a fundraiser on Friday. Would that be Fund 60 or Fund 21?
That one, I believe, that one is in Fund 21.
Okay. And then the other ones that I just jotted down off the top of my head, but definitely not an exhaustive list. Intermediate band, it's my understanding that they sometimes fundraise, and so I was curious as to why I didn't see that on the list. And then also programming like Destination Imagination.
Yep. And just to be clear, that fundraising is brought to the building principal for approval, and all fundraising is brought, approved fundraisers are brought to the business office. So we are aware of what is being fundraised, but I believe that again, and I don't have the wording in front of me, that just the difference is that it's the Fund 60 items that come to the board.
Okay, and
I'll
again,
get clarified.
there's no rush, but it would just be helpful
Sure.
to make sure that we're in alignment with the things that we're approving and what's under our purview. If you could just provide information for what falls under Fund 60 and what falls under Fund 21 as far as student activities, and then which ones need board approval, that would be helpful.
Sure. So you want a list of the items as well, just like the ones in 60, you want that for 21?
Just like the one you approved for tonight. Thank you so much for pulling that together. It seems like it's more nuanced. It's not very clear to me why they wouldn't be together. And then again, just wondering why we are approving some, but there are other fundraising
Yeah.
that's happening that is not being approved.
The difference between the two funds is the Fund 60, again, it's student-led. The students are making the decisions. Fund 21 is more, they can be donations. It can be fundraised as well, but it's not student-led. And so that's the difference, and that's probably why the board policy has always specified. But again, I'll get the information for you.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
I was just curious if any organizations had dropped off. Like, I was really happy to see that there was at least one new one on there. And basically, I mean, just to get like a pulse, like, are student organizations and student-led organizations thriving, or are we concerned? I mean, just kind of curious.
They were basically the same. Yeah, the new one is the class of 2026. So there's always going to be a new one every year, and one drops off. But yeah, they were basically the same. There might have been one or two that dropped off, but looking back, it was almost exactly the same. Yeah.
Well, that's awesome. Just a shout out to our students and staff for being able to sustain our
Yeah.
organizations. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
My apologies, just one other question for clarification. So according to this document, our 3 other intermediate schools, not including McNeil, are not doing student-led fundraising.
Correct. It's yes, they are not student-led organizations. The students are not making the decisions. So the advisor is instead.
And then I'm going to let this go, but there's NJHS at McNeil. Fruzen has MJHS as well. So it doesn't make sense
Right.
if McNeil's is on the list, why Fruzen's wouldn't be as well.
What the schools have told us is that the students are not making those decisions, so then it goes into Fund 21. It's still an organization. It's just the schools are telling us that those particular ones, the advisors are making the decisions.
Okay, if you could follow up on that and then just loop us back in, that'd be great. Thank you.
Yeah, to that conversation, I remember when this item came up last year, and we had that explanation in the earlier Business Operations and Finance Committee meeting. You said that we'd be working towards some consistency there. But I think when we look at, when we start talking about the strategic plan and other, like, decision-making that's made at the site level, if the concern is what others between Fund 60 and Fund 21 and the student leadership experiences we're providing for students, and like you said, there's a lack of consistency between what's happening in one building versus the other. The question comes up tonight when we see it, and like I said, it happened last year again because I was the one asking those questions. But I think these are things to be addressed at the level with the superintendent and the organizations, when we get establish a different level of consistency with our student-based experiences, because that's kind of the question that you're asking about. But like, this is the second time around that this has come. Yeah. Is there any a motion for action for item A?
I move to approve the 22-23 Fund 60 student activity groups.
Second.
Moved by Board Member Miller and seconded by Board Member Anderson, Spencer Anderson. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Motion passes unanimously. We're on to 6A. Resolution authorizing a taxable tax and revenue anticipation promissory note for cash flow purposes in the amount not to exceed $7 million. Ms. LaPointe, can you come back again for the board members that were not at the earlier meeting and just explain?
Sure. So as Dr. Anderson said before, the revenues that the districts receive throughout the year are not aligned with necessarily our needs. So we get equalization aid in September and again in December, and our taxes we start to receive in January. So districts often face a gap in November in particular, and then sometimes again later in the year. I just want to be prepared this year. I know that we've dipped into our fund balance, and so the possibility exists that we might have a cash flow issue in the next few weeks. So this line of credit would help cover that gap to ensure that we can, for example, still be able to make our payroll. My hope is to not dip into it, but it is there if we do need it. Repayment would be made as soon as we do receive those revenues, and so if we do have to dip into it in November, the plan is that those funds would be repaid within days or a week or so. So it really is just emergency borrowing in the event that we need it, and then if we don't, it's just there for us throughout the rest of the year in case we do. Any questions?
All right. Is there a motion?
Oh, I do have one question. Is there any penalty if we don't get it back in there within that week time, et cetera?
Oh, no, it's available throughout the year, but the quicker you get it back, the less interest you pay.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
Any other questions? All right, is there a motion?
I move to approve a resolution authorizing a taxable tax and revenue anticipation promissory note for cash flow purposes in an amount not to exceed $7 million.
Second.
Moved by Board Member Miller and seconded by Board Member Amy Levy. Is there any discussion?
Just as a reminder, it'll be a roll call vote. This is a resolution.
Thank you. Right. Hearing no discussion, I was ready to roll right into that. Mrs. Shope, could we have a roll call vote, please?
Sure. Amy Levy,
Aye.
Megan Miller,
Aye.
Jawan Winfield,
Aye.
Spencer Anderson,
Aye.
Brian Anderson,
Aye.
Sean Levy.
Aye.
Motion carried.
Yeah. 6B, referenda planning. So one of the things that happened in our governance meeting was to talk about referenda planning. We have been discussing referenda planning for about a year as we have looked at our budget situation. We did the initial work of working with school perceptions to survey our community, to ask and probe about questions in some areas. When we moved at about June, as we were making our way through the summer, we had some transition. So we lost a little bit of focus in our ability to do certain things, like conduct a joint committee to study operational and capital referendum. We had work that was in progress with Break Construction as they're completing a facility study. We do have parts of the study, but not the complete study. As we were hopefully in our transition from needing to hire a superintendent, one of our goals as we set out was that we would hire a superintendent in the fall. And then as we moved to the spring, we'd be positioning ourselves as that work was continuing to be in a place to ask possibly our community for for funding. We're facing a situation where we'll be looking at April 2023 or April 2024 as our opportunities to go out to referendum. And so in the in-between, Dr. Anderson has come along and getting into the summer and working into the fall as we prepared our budget. We're at the space where we've asked and lined up some questions, some possible things, and just as we're combing through the budget. We're looking at January 3rd as a date, 2023, that we would have to have something ready, language on the ballot. So we've got some decisions to make in between, and I think this conversation is about an ad hoc committee to study a referendum, to bring forward suggestions of questions or what we might do in that space of time. So we did have this discussion at the governance committee, and bringing it forward tonight for board members to have an opportunity to discuss, weigh in, and then we'll move towards an action, I think, at the end. All right. So we can just start with whoever wants to add at this time.
I'll jump in just because I was pretty vocal about it at the governance committee meeting. I think it's imperative that we put forward a logical budget, deficit, or I can't think of words right now, sorry, resolution. I'm thinking about I'm going to come back to that point actually in a minute. So we have to put forward, I think, a referendum. We have a phenomenal strategic plan that is geared toward maintaining staff levels and services to our students that are absolutely necessary. I was so excited about our Pupil Service Teaching Learning Equity Committee meeting last month, like just a couple of weeks ago, for all the amazing grant opportunities and services that we're providing to our kids and our families and communities. And none of those things are going to be sustainable unless we fully fund our school district. I want to point out the reason that I'm stumbling over words is because I just took a moment to verify my numbers here. I just want to say that the state of Wisconsin, as of October 14th, as reported by Wisconsin Public Radio, ended its state budget fiscal year with a record $4.3 billion budget surplus, which is money that is intentionally being withheld from communities and public education, which in my one of 7 personal opinion is criminal and harmful, if not violent, to the kids in our communities that are struggling with the range of things that we just talked about, sort of celebrated the grants that we're coming up with, right? AODA, homelessness, making sure that kids have a safe and consistent space to launder their clothes, right? So given all of that, I am fully in favor of starting an ad hoc committee. I'm open to like which, if it's authorized by the full board or it's under a committee. I don't have a strong opinion. I'll defer to the will of the group if that's the direction where we go. But I think we need an ad hoc committee to work with not only board members. I'd also like to bring in administration because administration also reaches out to our staff in ways that the board traditionally doesn't, so that we can get as many people to the table as necessary to make this happen. I just think that the amount of work that we've put into the strategic plan, which is really built by voices in our community, it's a beautiful piece of work that I'm personally very proud of. And I think it is a great sort of signal of the hope and high expectations and the desires that we have for all of our kids. It's got to be funded. And, I think we need to get a committee together as soon as possible to do that.
What is the time frame for the ad hoc committee, i.e. when will it start? What is the scope of work that we expect them to perform? And then when will they report back out to the full board if that information is known?
So I'm personally willing to meet every single day. But I'll just see what everybody else thinks.
Just one thing to clarify what President Levy mentioned earlier is that in order to have a referendum question on the ballot, that question has to be finalized and approved by the board no later than January 3rd.
All right, so another place to think about scope of work, today is November 1st. We might have another meeting around December 6th, I think is when we have another scheduled meeting. And then January, maybe somewhere in December 12th, and then January 3rd. So there's some work that would need to happen in between. It's a short window between now and January 3rd. So
So who's taking the lead in who's taking the lead potentially in recruiting members for this ad hoc? Okay, I'm all for it. If I could just understand the logistics of it, that would be helpful.
Well, this is the beginning of the conversation right now. Awesome. There are no answers right now.
When do you think we'd have, some of these missing pieces of data so that those that are on the ad hoc committee have enough information to work with? Like you say, I know you said, we're still waiting on Bray. I mean, do we anticipate that coming in tomorrow or 8 weeks from now? I mean, not that you might not know exactly, but I mean, those are the questions that, what can the ad hoc committee accomplish before such time as we have those kind of pieces of information?
One of the things that would need to happen is like the factual pieces that we do have. We have our budget kind of figured. We've got our Baird model from the past. There's some of the previous documents that have already been laid out. That information would be there. I think there's a part in really creating that awareness in our community of what has been taking place in the last year. What Dr. Anderson, I guess when some people just joined the conversation, when he expressed that we've got a problem, but it is fixable. There's a record number of districts across the state that are going to referendum in these last couple of years, and if not for ESSER funding, there are a lot of districts that would, be in a very bad situation. So I think that where we're at now, we don't know if that will turn into the action that we produce on January 3rd for our community to make a decision on April 2023. But I think in this time, what would happen with that committee is a framing of that conversation and putting those information and pieces that we do have out and other things that are have not been delivered yet that may come somewhere in between. By the time we get around December 12th, we'll have a better picture where we're at. But it's about some meetings need to happen, some things need to be done. These are things that we were not able to move on in the summertime, just not having people and leadership in place. Dr. Garrison.
Thank you, Board President Levy. So just as a point of clarity as well, we also have to have the question to legal as well, just for point of clarity as well. So December the 6th will be a natural opportunity for us to come together because that is a board meeting. December the 12th could be a special board meeting if we needed further conversations, but we will still at that point have to deliver something to legal. So they're aware of the questions so that it can be vetted appropriately to move forward before January 3rd.
All right.
So just thinking about logistics, if the board approves this ad hoc committee and we're recruiting through next week, then the committee has like 2 weeks to work. Am I missing something? Before they need to bring something back to the full board?
No, that's correct. I mean, I think one of the other purposes is that if not, we'd be waiting on, it would be an action that the full board would need to take up, and we'd only be able to take it up at different meetings. So the ad hoc committee meeting, it'll be a different composition, but there's a number of actions that need to take place outside of the regular board meeting, just to get things framed up. And the point is, even if we do or don't go for December, for April 2023, I think we'll be in a position where we still have something to do for April 2024. So there's work to be done one way or the other. And how long the committee, once the work gets started, we'll be at some natural decision points and be able to communicate out.
I would be in favor of creating the ad hoc committee with the understanding that we want this committee to work through when this arrives on the ballot, to garner support, to share information with community members. I think that's important to hear it from trusted sources. Or if we do need to push back or do an additional piece, I would love to have the ad hoc committee remain intact to help do that work. And then if we need to, we can always add to it to grow it.
I really like what Board Member Levy said, and in terms of meeting, I don't know, I don't want to speak for anybody, but I mean, I think we should have like some board members. I mean, I'm sure it's okay to have a quorum of board members on an ad hoc. It will be publicly noticed, just like any other meeting, et cetera. I think it would be very important to have Ms. Christopa involved, if she would like to be involved, just to help with that communication piece, and anybody else certainly who's interested. But, I mean, I'm curious to hear what other folks think as well.
Just as another point, I would definitely be willing to, assist in this conversation as well. As the incoming superintendent, I would love to make sure that we deliver information as appropriate as possible with the time frame that we do have.
There are other board members with questions or comments? Yeah. Yeah, a simple frame for us in this work is, like I said, we were able to complete a strategic plan. We have a superintendent, and now we still have to come up with a way to finance the vision that is set up in the strategic plan. Our budget is an issue that we have to deal with. There's numbers of ways to go about that, and referendum planning is one of the things that we have to do. So with that, is there a recommended action?
Can we make a motion at this point? Okay, well, then I would love to make a motion. So let me just make sure. Okay, so then I would like to move approval of an ad hoc committee to study the referendum, bring forward suggested referenda questions to the full Board of Education. Could we add and facilitate communication as appropriate? Is everybody okay with that motion language? Or do you not want to include the communication piece?
I would leave that out and work with the superintendent and the board on how, and Ms. Christopa.
Beautiful. So it's implied then. So let me just start over. So then I move approval of an ad hoc committee to study the referendum and to bring forward suggested referenda questions to the full Board of Education.
Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved by Board Member Miller and seconded by Board Member Amy Levy. Is there any discussion?
Do we want to mention in the motion the time frame? Because I think that was a key part of your thing, to make sure that this is not, through implementation or decision on the referendum, whether it's 2023 or 2024.
So in previous ad hoc committees, what we've done is we've gotten together, like the board has given the scope of the committee, and then there's like, once the committee meets, they appoint a chair, and then they come up with that timeline. So I do think that is something that the ad hoc committee can come up with.
Perfect.
If you want it reported back, we can certainly report back December 6th.
Nope, that's fine.
I do have a question. Who is tasked with recruiting for the ad hoc committee?
It's something that will work out between the board and the superintendent. Speaking for the administration.
Yeah, in the past, like, we haven't in the past, what we've done, although it's a little bit different in nature just because of the time sensitiveness.
There's
like,
policy to guide it too.
Yeah, there is policy to go, usually the board approves a list of members, like at a subsequent meeting, but I don't know that we necessarily have time to do that. So if we're comfortable with the scope being board members and administrators, personally, I think that's okay, but I'm curious to hear what my colleagues think.
Well, part of the, when you go back to the work that was suggested out of school perceptions, is it's a cross section. There's other community members that are involved also. So it's not just the board members and the administrators, but.
Could we hold off on this for just a moment? I want to pull up the pertinent policy related to this in case we need to suspend a portion of the policy in order to move forward with our tight timeline. So if we if everyone is okay, if we can move forward to the intermediate school model, I'll loop back through policy, and then if we could come back to 6B, excuse me, that would be helpful.
Okay. So we'll come back to B, intermediate school model. I think that one of the reasons that we added this to the agenda is along with some discussion about what is causing one area of bleed for us in students. Was mentioned that what is our intermediate school model? With the transition of the building of Fruzen, we transitioned to a 4th through 8th grade model, and the model has not been studied. Cavalierly, I'll just say I think that many people have expressed dissatisfaction with the current model, but a suggestion for, as we looked at what is a cause, is this is something that has been mentioned, is an area of concern for people, so it's up for study. This is the first conversation that we've had about making a shift, and so we wanted to make sure it was put on the agenda for board members to express themselves. We also know that there are administrators and teachers that teach at those levels that may have concerns, but that if that is something that would be done, it's something that would need to happen in this school year, and that's a change. But we needed to give it the opportunity to have discussion. So that's why we're here right now. So we'll open that up.
Cool, I'll start us off again. So I want to start by saying that I am a parent of a child at Fruzen, and I'm so thankful that she has the opportunity to attend. It's been nothing but positive stuff for our family. Given that, I think that what we've heard from the community, what we've seen from enrollment numbers, feedback that we've gotten over the years is a strong indicator that we have to move to a different model. I know that, I said this at the governance committee meeting, but I'll repeat it. I know that several years ago there was sort of a study that had started that had robust community input. I'd like to maybe suggest that our administration take a look at some of those notes if they still exist somewhere, because I think the participants, we had a really good cross-section of community participation, and I'm sure those thoughts are still valid, and I think it's important to include. I'm personally strongly in favor of, as quickly as possible, looking to shift back to a more traditional model. I don't have a strong opinion on what it looks like because I think that we have to hear from families, we have to hear from principals, and building leadership. I would say from elementary all the way up through the high schools about what that might look like. So, I'm not coming in with like a predetermined, like this is what it should be personally, but I think that we have to very quickly at least get sort of, like quickly, but as soon as possible get a sketch about what that might look like in the interest of retaining enrollment and just providing opportunities to our kids. I know one thing that we heard a couple of meetings ago, it's come up over the years and we just heard freshly, is it's between COVID and the intermediate model we have, it's really putting a huge strain on, band, orchestra, theater. All of these programs are like spread so far apart that it's very difficult to equitably distribute resources and opportunities to our kids. And so I just am in favor of moving toward a model that consolidates resources and is supportive, is as supportive as possible of supporting all of the, I don't even want to say extracurricular, but I'll say extracurricular and, non-core coursework that's offered to our kids.
Other board members?
I'll just have to say, it's been a tough transition for a lot of the kids that I know that go to the intermediate school, go into the high school. Just the fact that we have a kid that's 4th grade, 5th grade, 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade, then we put them at Beloit Memorial, expecting them to be successful, and it's not happening. I did a walkthrough a couple of weeks ago and had a conversation with Mrs. Pels, and she was explaining to me her feelings, as in she fears that this is the model that it's not working and we really need to change it like right away. And this is one of our building administrators. So I'm with Megan Miller on this one. Like we really need to look at some research, need to figure out what we need to do as a district to get back on track. And I really think that when we changed, that's when everything started really not looking well for us and our children. So in my opinion, I think my kids, they liked the fact that they was able to be at one school. I remember when we went to this model, I was driving to Robinson, Aldrich, Todd. I'm speaking from feelings, people. Listen to me. It was tough. And I don't know if you guys remember Morgan parking. Y'all remember Morgan parking was like, it was rough. So imagine going to Morgan, then Robinson. I'm not going to say amen, but it was tough. So I think if we just move forward, like getting these kids in a proper place to be successful, I think we'll be okay.
You know, a different board made the decision to move to that model, and I think there could have been good reasons. I don't know what they are, so I'd love to see all the pros and cons, kind of like Board Member Miller said. You know, let's put the work in and find out, you know, what's changed, if anything, and give it the due process. And if we can find a model that, you know, serves our strategic plan, you know, as that guides us, I think that's a key piece of this, which is kind of what we talk about all the time, is how do we support the strategic plan. So kind of like Board Member Miller, I don't want to say as soon as possible because we don't like to have artificial time horizons, but it is, you know, there's no better time to make if there's a positive change to be made, then let's make it once we have all the information.
I agree. So, I agree with everything that's been said so far. I really think that we should take another look at this because the things that we've heard from community members, the things that people are experiencing at this current model, it's worth the time to actually look at it right now and to start kind of studying and see, okay, what are the benefits that we are getting now? What are the disadvantages that we're also getting from it? And then making that change to see what we can actually do to benefit our students and our staff and the families that go to our schools.
All right. I think as has been expressed, a model that'll work to support our strategic plan. You think about what middle school is or what we hope for it to be. We also have our Ford NGL work at our high school. So there's an opportunity if this work in our middle grades can support that. There are some middle school academies that will line up to that process to help students understand and have voice and choice. So these are just some things to be considered. Like I said, it has not been studied since it was set up. And I think that what I'm hearing from us tonight, I don't necessarily believe we need a motion because as we sit with the superintendent and we have to set priorities, that is something that's clear we can come back around to. But I think the consensus of the board is let's examine this for possible action, but it takes some study.
I just have a quick question. I'd like to hear from the administration what would make sense. So you've just heard kind of our different perspectives, and I'm just curious, from where you're sitting, what would be an appropriate scope and timeline to consider this issue?
So we have had, well, again, based off of the transition time that I've had, we've had a few conversations about this, both now and, of course, in a few weeks before I came. One of the things that I want to say is that there was a track record that in the Beloit School District of Beloit, we had a K-5 at one point, we had a 6-8 at one point, and we had a 9-12 at one point. And so we can always go back and just look at certain things that we've already had. That's a starting point for conversations. Naturally, there's other conversations that do need to be had as pertains to kind of the community and the parents and of course, our teaching staff as well. Of course, the administration and of course, principals, assistant principals, the whole community should have opportunities to kind of at least weigh in on this thought. Secondly, I think, again, so we have information of kind of where we were in the past to kind of start with. The second thing I would like to say is if we're going to make a suggested change as such, naturally, everyone has to be at the table to have those conversations. But we have, in my mind, if September, let's say September 3rd is the first day of school, if that's the first day of school, I don't know if that's the first day of school or not, but let's say September 3rd is the first day of school for the 2023 school year, we would need to have our decision that we're going to move to this conversation done as quickly as possible. And what does that actually mean? After information has been shared, after we have listened, after we have gathered certain conversations, then we'll be able to come to the board and say this is what our community wants. From there, then there's additional conversations on how this actually looks. Naturally, there's lines that, I shouldn't say lines that we have to think about, but elementaries will be shifting. That means certain students that live in certain places will have to go to certain schools, and so there's a conversation around not necessarily redistricting, as I have been thinking about this already, not redistricting anything like that, but more so where certain students will have to go based off of our new configuration. I also have to have additional conversations with the teaching and learning department as it pertains to, of course, the move itself. What does that mean for curriculum? Naturally, as an incoming superintendent, I have a real strong belief around, curriculums that we will need to make sure these transitions are appropriate, but also for our teachers. Then I would definitely need to have conversations with the building and grounds crew, because we will be shifting a lot of teacher stuff from one buildings back to the next, books. I mean, again, there's a large gambit of things that will have to be kind of reconfigured back to the way, again, the school district of Beloit was, let's say 5-6 years ago. From there, of course, we have to look at pupil services, naturally. In this conversation, we have to start thinking about, okay, of course, class list and, all that information like you're getting ready to go back to school will need to be had in the hands of all of our parents. I like to say by that first week of June. Again, this is with me and my own crazy brain thinking about how certain things could actually possibly transpire. Now, again, I have not written a plan for this as yet. I want everyone to know that. But I have been thinking about kind of what we would have to do in order for us to kind of move this conversation forward, if it's the will of course, the board and, of course, the school community to do such a thing. Finally in that conversation, once schedules are in hand, everyone knows where they're going, naturally communication has to be on the hip all the way through. So, of course, Mrs. Monica, Mrs. Christopa, and myself will have to be at the hip with certain communications as things kind of transpire. I don't want to leave the principals out of this conversation because our principals have probably the most important conversation, which is making sure that our families are welcome prior to the start of the school year, right? And so we can have schedules in hand, but you have to also have conversations with parents as they're coming in, hey, come meet the school, come see where your kid's going to be, all that big move-in time frame from July through August is a very important time to also make connections with kids in schools that they will be now, transitioning back to, or in this case, moving up to if you're going into middle school, 6th through 8. Naturally, there's other conversations out there about what buildings will need to be kind of reshifted and or realigned. And that's a nice way of saying that conversation, reshifting and or realigned versus the possible closures. And so that is a conversation that we'll also have to have as well. Now, again, I have not written a plan for this, but in my early brain and thinking about the possibilities around this opportunity for the school district of Beloit, here are some of the things that will possibly need to be done moving forward. And I hope that's on record so I can go back and write it all down.
No, that's really helpful, and I appreciate you. Yeah, it's on YouTube.
Thank you.
No, thank you so much for that. And I'm just kind of curious, based on kind of the scope of what's laid before you currently. When would be a reasonable time to expect this to maybe come back as a discussion or information piece?
So in that, this is the first conversation from the board, at least from the board to the community. I believe the appropriate time frame will be, naturally, I'm looking at, what we also have to get done from a responsibility perspective. Reasonably, I believe we should be able to, I always like to say, February, we need to have a decision before you all from a community perspective, weighing in from teachers, parents, everybody that I just mentioned, right? To see kind of if this is the direction we want to go, no later than that, because there will be a lot of work that will need to transpire between that February and that June timeframe. That kind of gave everybody kind of a tentative thought, just a kind of thought process to think through. Luckily, it won't necessarily affect the high school because 9th through 12 will still be 9th through 12th. Of course, we talked about academies and whatnot, but 9th through 12th will pretty much remain intact because kids leave 8th grade and go to 9th grade. But it will definitely be a K-8 conversation. And so I think by that last meeting in February, at the latest, that should be enough time for myself to, get acclimated, start having conversations with community. And those conversations will happen both during the day. Again, I haven't made a plan, but I've been thinking about it. Those conversations should happen both during the day and after school. And so to capture some of the folk that may be here already during the day that can come and have conversations about how they feel about this opportunity that we're possibly putting forth to the board, and of course, after school as well. My goal is to have these conversations in off weeks of the board meetings based off of my calendar to allow myself to have that, possible reporting time as necessary. And that'll be the same route that we would want to go as it pertains to referenda as well, have both morning meetings or during the day meetings, of course, and of course after school opportunities. And so that's just a nutshell thought from the administration. Again, I don't want to speak for the rest of my team, but that's kind of what I've been thinking in the back of my crazy brain.
That's fabulous and very thorough, and I really appreciate. Definitely answered my question. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I would, Dr. Anderson, you want to weigh in also?
Well, one of the things that I mentioned at the governance meeting is that a possible conversation in front of the board could be to have the intermediate center principals work on, since they're boots on the ground, they're the ones who are been working under this system for a while, to have them come back and in the near future meeting and give the board their perspective on what they see, and in a perfect world, what they would like the board to consider.
Right, and as we as an example, like I said, we completed our strategic planning. We need to hire a superintendent. Along the way in addressing our budget, intermediate school model came up and became a priority. And the work there's a place for the work in the strategic plan, and it is something that our community has expressed. So that is kind of the process as we're moving forward, how this has come. And then, like I said, when we go back into the budget development, like I said, that February, March timeline, if there's, as Dr. Garrison said, reallocation of people, resources, a lot of movement to happen in between, along with the same time of the possible referenda planning or action that might need to be taken to stabilize our financial future. So there's lots of things happening, and maintaining satisfaction of families, if they have a more preferable model where they're not leaving, is a part of that. So this is all work that's done in that process. Like I said, I think we've kicked it enough. What I would say is that it'll move forward in conversations in terms of expectation with Dr. Garrison and the administrative team as we continue to talk about evaluation and other parts like that. So the priorities will be set and we'll move forward. Going back to B, referenda planning, having a chance to kind of review that ad hoc policy. What I would suggest to board members that we do tonight is there's a role for the board president and the superintendent that we just leave this for the referendum planning for discussion tonight. I'm going to suggest that we leave this for discussion tonight, and in between, working with Dr. Anderson and Dr. Garrison and looking at that policy, we'll fulfill the obligations of that policy to come back around. That is my preference.
If I may, I have a different suggestion. What I would suggest is that we move forward with the motion that was on the table. And then thank you everyone for your patience. I pulled up the policy, and what we could do is to handle that motion, and then in a second motion, suspend the portions of policy 186 Rule 1 that require board approval for ad hoc committee appointments. And if the process begins prior to November 14th, which I hope that it does because we're on a tight time frame, to change the language to list our incoming superintendent to make appointments and convene the first meeting. So if anyone hasn't had a chance to pull up that policy, again, that's 186 Rule 1. The board president does the committee appointments from community members, and then the board approves those, and then the superintendent does the appointment for staff members, and then the board approves those. So if we just say we trust your judgment, we'll waive that. I think we could appropriately move forward this evening, so I would be interested in what other board members, what their preference is.
Well, before we begin, I'm just going to say again, having reviewed the policy and some of the actions that are going to take place, I would prefer that we just follow the policy as it's written and pick this part up on the 15th. There's some work that needs to happen in between, and that's going to end up happening between myself and the Dr. Anderson and Dr. Garrison to get people in place. And I think that we'll just have a better and complete picture on the 15th, more so than even with waiving policies tonight.
So just for clarification, are you saying that behind the scenes prior to the 15th, that you and Dr. Garrison will be looking at appointments for the committee, or is that something that's going to start once we reach the 15th?
Having reviewed the policy, I will come on the 15th with items for you all to approve.
When you say items, do you mean potential committee members?
The fulfillment of the policy as it's written.
I just want to be specific, so that's yes.
That's yes. To fulfilling what is written in the policy. There's 5 other people. How would you like to proceed?
Can we, under the original motion, if we, yeah, under that motion.
Yeah, the language is in board docs under motion and voting.
And as Board Member A. Levy pointed out in the policy, if it, can we rely on a committed action between now and the 14th from the incoming superintendent? I know he's spending some time, but can we, ask for those duties to be done between now and the 14th? I know we want to, get moving on this, but that would be my only concern of assigning him some responsibilities before the 14th.
Rescind the motion, please.
There's already a second, so the motion would have to be defeated if we don't want to move forward with it.
I'll defeat the motion.
I mean, I'm just in favor of moving forward as quickly as possible. I feel a little odd about asking Dr. Garrison, who isn't like really working for us yet, to do work. So, I mean, I wouldn't be opposed to waiving that part of the policy just so like we can convene. I mean, I'm definitely willing to serve on there, and I know, I'm sure at least some of our administration is as well if we want to get the ball rolling. But I mean, if we think that we can get it together in time the way you want it, I'm fine either way. I mean,
Well, I don't know how to express this any other way, but to say, yes, there's some things that need to be done quickly, but we need to slow down. One, with the responsibilities that are listed, I'm going to say it again. My move would be defeat the motion, and we'll proceed and it'll get to a place. There's some steps that need to be taken. It's not worth the rush. Things will be where they need to be. And that's what I would be asking all of you, since those are portions that I need to carry out.
So I just want to get clear. So I'm happy to support what you were saying. I just want to, you can help me understand then, like, so what is the timeline for the earliest that we'd be able to convene a committee, given like the 2-week-ish timeframe that we have?
We'll be convening the 15th.
So let me just be clear. If we postpone to the 15th and you come to us, because literally the two responsibilities of the board president in this policy is to appoint community members to the committee, and then if the board approves those on the 15th, is scheduling of the first meeting already going to be, are you coming with that on the 15th as well?
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, there's a motion on the floor. It's been moved by who?
Motion by Megan Miller, second by Amy Levy.
Motion by Megan Miller, seconded by Amy Levy. Is there any other discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. All those opposed signify by saying nay.
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 What?
Nay.
I apologize. My mic was working. I'm an aye.
Okay. Let's have a roll call vote, please, Ms. Shope.
Sure. Brian Anderson,
Nay.
Amy Levy,
Aye.
Megan Miller,
Nay.
Joanne Winfield,
Nay.
Sean Levy,
Nay.
Spencer Anderson.
Nay.
The motion failed.
Okay. This will come back on the 15th.
Thank you.
Item 7A, future board meeting dates. We have a policy committee November 2nd at 5:30 p.m. Teaching, Learning, Equity, and Pupil Service Tuesday, November 15th at 5:30 p.m. Human Resources Tuesday, November 15th at 6:30 p.m. And a regular board meeting November 15th at 7 p.m. Executive session items for 8. A motion may be made and a vote taken to convene the Board of Education into closed session pursuant to Section 19.85, parentheses 1, parentheses C of the Wisconsin State Statutes relative to considering employment, promotion, compensation, or performance evaluation data of any public employee over which the governmental body has jurisdiction or exercises responsibility, and Section 19.85, parentheses 1, parentheses G, relative to conferring with legal counsel for the governmental body who is rendering oral or written advice concerning strategy to be adopted by the body with respect to litigation in which it is or is likely to become involved. Is there a motion?
Just want to clarify, we're going to be adjourning from closed?
We will be adjourning from closed session.
Thanks, so moved.
Seconded.
Moved by Board Member Megan Miller and seconded by Board Member Brian Anderson. Is there any discussion? Mr. Shope, could we have a roll call vote, please?
Yes, you may. Joanne Winfield,
Aye.
Megan Miller,
Aye.
Amy Levy,
Aye.
Brian Anderson,
Aye.
Spencer Anderson,
Aye.
Sean Levy.
Aye.
Motion carried.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Good evening.